Hello everybody and welcome to today's flight, in which we'll be flying around between Bellingham and Seattle, Washington, discussing the interesting case of the supposed first jet airplane designed and built a mere 7 years after the Wright brothers famously took to the sky in 1903. From there, we'll also be looking at the evolution of the jet airplane and how we got to the more modern version we all know and love today.
Scatter traffic, Warrior 9012 Juliet, taxi, parking, Alpha, runway 11, scatter.
In October of 1910, the city of Paris was playing host to a historic event, the Second International Aeronautical Exhibition, a grand showcase of the very latest in aviation technology. To the average visitor, the rickety canvas and wire flying machines lining the halls of the Grand Palais would have seemed exotic and cutting edge. But one exhibit stood out among the rest. Set aside in a separate exhibition hall, the brick red aircraft was unlike anything anyone had ever seen. Its sleek wings lacked the drag-producing bracing wires that festooned most contemporary aircraft, while its tail featured unique X-shaped stabilizers. But strangest of all, the odd contraption lacked a seemingly vital component, a propeller. Instead, the aircraft was propelled by an unusual barrel-shaped device mounted to its nose, which its creator, Romanian-born Henri Coandă, dubbed a turbo propulsor, the ancestor of the modern jet engine. Later in life, Coandă would claim that his creation was the first jet-powered aircraft to take the air, a title traditionally claimed by the German-built Heinkel HE-178 on August 27, 1939. But is this true? Did the first jet aircraft actually fly all the way back in 1910, barely 7 years after the Wright brothers' pioneering flight? The answer is a lot more complicated than you might think and depends a great deal on how you define the term jet aircraft. This is the controversial story of the Coandă 1910, a forgotten aircraft decades ahead of its time. Henri Marie Coandă was born in Bucharesti on June 7, 1886, the second son of General Constantin Coandă, a career army officer. Following his father's wishes, in 1899 Coandă enrolled at the military high school in Iași, graduating in 1903 with the rank of sergeant major. He continued his studies at the School of Artillery, Military, and Naval Engineering in Bucharesti, as well as followed this up with some schooling in Berlin, Germany, as well as the Montefiore Institute in Liège, Belgium, graduating in 1908 as an artillery officer. However, Coandă's creative temperament did not mesh well with military life, and that same year he left the army and embarked on a long automobile trip that took him as far afield as Persia, today Iran, and Tibet. Upon his return in 1909, Coandă, who had long been fascinated with the brand new and rapidly advancing field of aeronautics, moved to Paris and enrolled at the National Superior School for Aeronautical Construction Engineering, graduating a year later as part of France's first class of professional aeronautical engineers. Shortly thereafter, Coandă partnered with Italian aviation pioneer Gianni Caproni and began construction on an exotic new aircraft with which he hoped to make his name. The Coandă 1910 caused a splash when it debuted at the 1910 Aeronautics Exhibition, with the trade publication La Technique Aéronautique writing, "In the absence of definitive trials permitting the precise yield of this machine, it is without a doubt premature to say it will supersede the propeller. The tentative is interesting and we watch it closely." Indeed, the strange-looking aircraft sported many advanced features for its era. Its wings, built around tubular steel frames, were fully cantilevered and required no drag-producing wire bracing. Though commonly described as a biplane, the aircraft's lower wings were significantly shorter than its upper wings, technically making it a sesquiplane, meaning 1.5 wings. The X-shaped tail incorporated early versions of what are now known as ruddervators, while Coandă claimed that later versions of the aircraft even featured retractable landing gear. However, some of its features were still decidedly old-fashioned. For example, for roll control, the aircraft used Wright Brothers-style wing warping instead of the recently invented ailerons. Also, the classic control column and rudder pedals arrangement for aircraft controls had not yet become standard, so the Coandă 1910 instead featured a pair of large control wheels mounted on either side of the fuselage outside the cockpit, similar to the successful Antoinette IV monoplane. But the centerpiece of the design was its unique propulsion system, Coandă's so-called turbo propulsor. Though sometimes described as the first jet engine, Coandă's invention worked differently from modern jets. You see, in a classic turbojet engine, air is drawn in at the front and passed through a compressor. The compressed air is then fed into a combustion chamber, mixed with fuel, and ignited, producing hot, high-pressure exhaust. This exhaust is expelled through a turbine and out the rear engine, producing thrust. Meanwhile, the turbine powers the compressor via a rotating shaft, making the whole cycle self-sustaining. By contrast, in Coandă's turbopropulsor, the centrifugal rotary compressor was driven by a conventional reciprocating gasoline engine, in this case a 50 horsepower Clerget inline. The compressed air was then fed into a duct where it was mixed with fuel and ignited, with the resulting exhaust being expelled out a nozzle at the rear of the engine. Coandă's engine was thus more of a ducted fan with an afterburner than an actual jet engine. And for this reason, such engines are now typically referred to as motor jets or thermojets to distinguish them from pure turbojets. Despite this, had the aircraft actually flown, then it would still have a strong claim to the title of first jet aircraft. And indeed, Coandă later claimed that the aircraft did fly, albeit briefly, on December 16, 1910, shortly after it was exhibited in Paris. As Coandă recounted in a 1967 interview, "In December we brought the airplane out of its hangar at Issy-les-Moulineaux and after a bit of coaxing started the motor. I must admit that I was never a very outstanding pilot. I always seemed unable to shake off a vague apprehension and, that morning, in addition to my unusual uneasiness, I was rather excited. I climbed in the cockpit, accelerated the motor, and felt the power from the jet thrust straining the plane forward. I gave the signal to remove the wheel blocks and the plane started moving slowly ahead. I had anticipated that I would not attempt to fly today but would make only ground tests on a small field. The controls seemed too loose to me, so I injected fuel into the turbine. Too much. In a moment I was surrounded by flames. I had to cut back and reduce my power quickly. I worked the throttle and the flames subsided. Only then did I have an opportunity to lift my head. I saw that the plane had gained speed and that the walls of the ancient fortifications bordering the field were lunging toward me. I pulled back on the stick, only much too hard. In a moment the plane was airborne, lunging upward at a steep angle. I was flying. I felt the plane tipping, then slipping down on one wing. Instinctively, I cut the gas with my left hand and the jet fuel with my right. The next thing I knew, I found myself thrown free of the plane, which slowly came down and burst into flames. It was impossible to determine from the wreckage whether the celluloid or the fuel was the cause of the fire, but the test was over. I had flown the first jet airplane. Coandă later determined the crash to have been caused by an unusual and unexpected phenomenon. Though Coandă had taken pains to protect vital areas of the aircraft from the jet exhaust with sheets of mica and asbestos, said exhaust had not behaved as expected. Rather than fanning out away from the aircraft, jet stream had instead clung closely to the fuselage, quickly setting its highly flammable wood and cloth structure ablaze. Intrigued, Coandă would spend the next 3 decades investigating this phenomenon, publishing a paper on it in 1936. The tendency of fluid flows to stick to a convex surface is now known as the Coandă effect in his honor and has many applications in the field of aeronautics. But while this flight, brief as it was, would seem to confirm the Coandă 1910's claim to being the world's first jet aircraft, many historians and aerospace engineers are highly skeptical of Coandă's claims. For one thing, Coandă never claimed to have flown his aircraft in 1910. The story of the taxi test gone awry first appeared 4 decades later in a September of 1956 interview in the Royal Air Force Flying Review. The following year, a published Victor Hort claimed that the flight was witnessed by a French aircraft designer, Louis Breguet and Gabriel Voisin. However, neither of these men make any mention of the incident in their memoirs. Furthermore, as historian Charles Gibbs Smith of the London Science Museum pointed out in 1960, the testing field at the airport in question, where the flight purportedly took place, was under constant observation by the French army, journalists, and international aviation experts, yet suspiciously no accounts of such a test flight or fiery crash appear in contemporary newspapers or military records. Then there is the matter of how exactly Coandă's engine and aircraft worked. Both Coandă and Hort claimed that the aircraft tested on December 16, 1910, featured retractable landing gear, retractable slots on the wings for greater lift, a fuel tank mounted above the wing, and fuel injection and a combustion aft of the motor turbine. However, neither Coandă's 1910 patents nor photographs of the aircraft displayed at the 1910 Aeronautics Exhibition showed any such features. Indeed, the fuel injection system does not appear in any of Coandă's patents until much later. In 1956, Coandă produced a set of drawings to prove that his 1910 engine did indeed feature fuel combustion, but these were determined to have been heavily reworked. If true, Coandă 1910's engine did not have any afterburning capability and was simply a form of ducted fan that produced a stream of regular cold air. If this is indeed the case, then it is doubtful that the aircraft could ever have left the ground. While Coandă claimed that his turbopropulsor was capable of generating 2.2 kilonewtons of thrust, an analysis of the engine by French engineer Gerard Hartmann revealed that in order to produce the minimum 240 newtons the aircraft needed to take off, the compressor would have had to spin at 7,000 RPM, likely causing it to fly apart. and while fuel injection and combustion would have significantly increased the thrust, given the engine's position at the front of the fuselage, operating the afterburner for any significant length of time would inevitably have led to a fiery and agonizing death for the pilot. There were other flaws with the aircraft as well, despite the advanced nature of the Coandă 1910's tubular cantilevered wings. Modern analysis has revealed that the joints holding them to the fuselage were insufficiently strong, meaning that had the aircraft succeeded in getting airborne, it likely would have fallen apart. Layer disturbed by the horizontal stabilizer would also have interfered with the unique X-shaped tail, rendering it almost useless. In conclusion, it is highly unlikely that the Coandă 1910 was an actual jet aircraft, that it was ever test flown, or that it ever could have flown as built. Instead, it appears that Coandă, having witnessed the rise of practical jet aircraft in the 1940s and 1950s, concocted the story of the failed 1910 flight in an attempt to secure his place in history as the world's first jet pilot. But while Coandă would build no further aircraft, he saw enough promise in his turbo propulsor to pursue further development. In late 1910, he patented an improved version which he used in the construction of a turbine-powered sled commissioned by Cyril Vladimirovich, Grand Duke of Russia. The sled was blessed by Russian Orthodox priests on December 2, 1910, and immediately embarked on a tour of automotive and technical expositions sponsored by the maker of its engine, Automobiles Grégoire, while trade publications of the time reported its design speed as 97 kilometers per hour, there is no evidence that the sled was ever tested or used. 30 years later, in 1942, Coandă signed a contract with the German army to produce turbine-powered ambulance sleds for use on the Eastern Front, but the contract expired 1 year later with no vehicles ever being built. Thus ended Coandă's 3 decades of work on the turbo propulsor. Meanwhile, other inventors were also experimenting with the motorjet concept. In 1931, Italian engineer Secondo Campanini submitted a study on jet propulsion to the Italian government, seeking funds to pursue further development. After successfully demonstrating a motorjet-powered boat in Venice, Campanini was awarded a contract by the Royal Italian Air Force and partnered with aircraft manufacturer Caproni to develop and test his engine. The result was the pioneering Caproni Capini N1, completed in early 1940. An unusual-looking aircraft for its day, the 2-seat all-metal monoplane was built around a hollow cylindrical fuselage open at both ends. This contained an advanced motorjet consisting of a 3-stage variable incidence compressor driven by a 900 horsepower Isotta Fraschini V12 engine with a ring-shaped afterburner just forward of the exhaust nozzle. Some of the airflow produced by the compressor was used to cool the engine, while the engine exhaust was mixed with a jet stream, recovering much of the thermal energy typically lost in piston engines and converting it to additional thrust. N1 first flew on August 27, 1940 over the Caproni factory outside Milan, with the test pilot Mario De Bernardi at the controls. The concept proved sound enough to warrant the construction of a second prototype, which on November 30th, 1941 performed a highly publicized demonstration flight over Rome witnessed by Italian dictator Benito Mussolini. Development continued into 1943 when the Allied invasion of Italy forced the project to be abandoned. By then, however, flight testing had revealed the motorjet to be plagued with problems. For one thing, the heat produced by the engine was so tremendous that the cockpit canopy had to be kept permanently open to prevent the pilots from being cooked alive. Worse still, despite its exotic propulsion system, the N1 was slower than most contemporary propeller-driven aircraft and never exhibited the performance required to be a successful fighter. Nonetheless, the Caproni Capini N1 was widely considered the first jet-powered aircraft in history, that is, until the successful 1939 flight of the turbojet-powered Heinkel HE-178 was revealed just a few years later. Other nations also experimented with motor jets, including the Soviet Union, who in 1944 developed the Mikoyan-Gorevich I-250 in an attempt to counter the German Messerschmitt Me-262, the world's first operational jet fighter. Powered by a conventional piston engine driving both a propeller and a motorjet turbine, the I-250 could reach an impressive speed of 820 kilometers per hour, but production problems meant that the war ended before it could enter service, and the project was cancelled shortly thereafter. The Japanese also developed a motorjet called the TSU-11, intended for use on the Yokosuka MXY-7 Oka suicide aircraft. Effectively a wing-piloted bomb, the Oka was carried to its target by a larger bomber aircraft and released, whereupon the pilot ignited a set of solid rocket motors and guided the aircraft on a collision course with an enemy ship. While nearly unstoppable once launched, the Oka's launching aircraft was slow and vulnerable to enemy fighters, meaning that in practice most were shot down before they ever reached their targets. The TSU-11 motorjet was intended to increase the Oka's range, allowing it to be launched from farther away, but the war ended before it could ever be deployed. In the end, however, the motorjet proved a technological dead end with the development of true turbojet engines by Hans von Ohen in Germany and Frank Whittle in Britain, rendering the concept obsolete almost overnight. But while Henri Coandă's 1910 creation might not have been a true jet aircraft and would almost certainly not have worked as built, it was nonetheless a remarkable far-sighted glimpse into the future of aviation. Indeed, while dismissive of most of Coandă's claims, Charles Gibbs Smith nonetheless praised the Romanian inventor's creativity in 1970, writing, "Another unsuccessful but prophetic machine was the Coandă biplane exhibited at the Paris Salon in October of 1910. Although inevitably earthbound, this aircraft stands as the first full-size attempt at a jet-propelled airplane."